Your conference is being recorded.
Hey, good afternoon, or good morning, rather. This is Matt Gerike and Joe Sewash with ISP. The time is 9:56. We'll be starting the webinar on time at 10 a.m. For those that are participating through the dial-in bridge, thank you for attending. And also, please make sure to put your phone on mute and to not use hold because the background music does interfere with the presenter's audio. I will be starting in 4 minutes. Thank you. Okay, it is it is 10 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, this is Joe Sewash and Matt Gerike with ISP. We appreciate everyone taking time in their day to spend some time with us on beginning the process for PSAP boundary development. The boundary process documentation and tools were released in late March ahead of the BAMLS meeting, and these will be an important component for NextGen 911 deployments and preparing your GIS data. For those that are attending on the conference bridge, please make sure to mute your line. We're hearing a little bit of background noise with doors closing and phones moving. Also, please make sure not to put us on hold, as background music does compete and interfere with the presentation on the bridge. So we'll go ahead and get started in the process here. We'll talk a little bit about boundary basics, then we'll turn it over to Matt for both a demonstration of the process and tools, a little bit about the technical model, and also recommendations for how to engage your boundary partner neighbors. I'll go through some questions that we've received in the 6 weeks or so that the tool's been available, and also leave some time at the end for discussion questions. If you have discussion questions during the call, please enter those in the chat window, and we'll interject those at the appropriate time. And we should have some time in the timeline here to be able to handle questions at the end. So we'll go ahead and dive in on the boundary basics. So the concept of NextGen 911 has been in development for almost a decade. Here in Virginia, we've been planning for it for the better part of 5 or 6 years. In 2018 was milestones in place from the 911 board to approve a deployment plan, as well as ISP working through the regional coordinators and engaging PSAPs in setting plans for the technical side and the programmatic side and the funding side for NextGen deployment throughout the state. An important context for understanding NextGen 911 is the National Emergency Number Association standards. These can be accessed at a website, www.nena.org/standards. As of last count, there's approximately 127 standards and informational documents that cover all aspects of 911 technology and deployment recommendations, with a significant number of those impacting or documenting the GIS side. We want to make sure that in this next generation 911 transition that there's an understanding this is a transition from analog networks that are being retired to IP-based networks that are going to serve as a platform for the next several decades of 911 service. And having these IT-based networks also provides a significant amount of flexibility and flexibility in terms of new and yet to be evolved technologies, but also the context of being able to transfer calls between PSAPs in the old analog environment. These selective router regions operated as islands, and even though neighbors may be neighbors on the ground, if they happen to be on selective router regions that were neighboring, there was no convenient way to transfer calls outside of a landline. So this is a very important process in terms of being able to optimize and prepare the network for the future. The ideas in context also is that call routing, the process of connecting someone who dials 911 to a PSAP, that process of selecting which PSAP to route the 911 caller to will be important moving forward. So call routing today depends on 2 flat file databases. One is the Automatic Location Identification Database, or the ALI database. This is effectively all of the all of the landline locations across the state that connect a landline number to its assigned PSAP through its emergency service number, and also the Master Street Address Guide. For the GIS-oriented, this represents the attribute table from the Road Centerline database. The two are very similar, and within the Master Street Address Guide, each street segment has a specific formatting for the name, as well as the address ranges that can be used as an alternative for the alley if the call is coming from a non-landline technology. So you can see here that the graphic that's pulled up on the side, you can have the numbers in the top layer that represent the spatial locations from the alley database. You have the PSAP jurisdictions in that middle layer, and then associating those geographic locations to the correct PSAP adequately represents what's known as geospatial call routing. So we'll use the latitude and longitude of the caller to select the appropriate PSAP from an authoritative statewide database of the PSAP boundary segments, and consequently the polygons developed from each of those segments to run this process. And from March of 2017 through February of 2018, PSAPs across the state routed just under 4 million calls. So in the future, when we get to the full deployment of NextGen 911, each one of those 4 million calls is going to be dependent on the GIS data that underlies it, and also the PSAP boundaries that we're talking about today. The important context here for these PSAP boundary polygons is that there be no gaps or overlaps. So a gap, if a latitude-longitude pair were to be resolved to that particular gap, that would be a problem for the routing process and the automation. Also, within the context of creating these boundaries, the process that Matt's going to go through both on the technical side and the social side is this is a brand new data layer. It's not attached to administrative boundaries or other boundaries, but each of these 392 segments across the Commonwealth are jointly owned by two PSAPs. So the context here is that PSAPs today, as a matter of their operations, are acutely aware of areas that you have individual challenges. It might be the layout of where the individual towers are and how the calls are routed today. It could be instances where you may have a house or a subdivision that you have to traverse into a neighboring jurisdiction to be able to access. And through this process of defining the junction points that are the beginning and end of each segment, as well as where the neighboring PSAPs want those segments to be, you can actually create these shared boundary geometry segments that will then be submitted to ISP. We'll make sure that the junctions line up and form correct polygons. In looking down the road, these will also have impacts on interstate boundaries. So the need to be able to create a statewide polygon developed from the individual segments that individual PSAPs and localities create. We'll also be working to facilitate instances between a Virginia PSAP and a PSAP in a neighboring state, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, or the District of Columbia. We'll be working with you to facilitate that connection so that effectively the state will be composed of a series of locally defined PSAP boundaries that will connect and form a clean boundary for the entire state. You can see that Matt has brought up the layer here, and I'll turn it over to Matt now to describe this layer and the ongoing process.
So in terms of thinking about what we as the Commonwealth need to do for next generation 911 deployment is creating this new data set to the standard and figuring out how to do that for all 392 individual PSAP segments. This is based in some cases on existing knowledge and some existing data, but really in the next generation 911 framework, it is an entirely new data set. There are several levels of roles and responsibilities that members of localities as well as the VIA ISP office have in terms of helping frame this process. And we don't think it would be possible to achieve a boundary segment or a complete boundary polygon for a locality, let alone the complete polygon layer for the Commonwealth without the engagement of all these different parties. PSAP staff has a very prominent role and responsibility, and so we need the appropriate PSAP staff to be engaged. And from the two localities bordering a PSAP boundary line segment, it's really a decision between the two PSAP managers or their designees about where that PSAP boundary line actually goes. And so they need to be engaged, they need to be able to work with their neighboring PSAP staff and be able to decide where that goes. In some circumstances, the PSAP staff that are at the table may have GIS skills and may be able to work with the toolkit that we have published on the VGIN Clearinghouse and be able to edit the source data and generate a segment representing where that PSAP boundary line is and submit that. And if so, that is great, excellent, and awesome. If that's not the case, GIS staff at the locality level may be called in. There may be an opportunity for them to support or provide guidance or to drive the GIS during the meeting as the PSAP boundary line is looked at, considered, and adjusted. And so this circumstance will vary locality by locality, but we know in many cases GIS staff at the locality level are going to provide that first line of technical support and help in terms of adjusting the provided data to reflect the agreed upon PSAP boundary line. The third role and responsibility at the locality level could be met by staff on the PSAP side or staff on the GIS side of the equation, and that is someone on one side of each segment is going to have to take the lead on setting up and arranging meetings to discuss a particular segment. Someone's going to need to pick up the ball and run with it in terms of making this process work. That can be worked out any number of different ways. If you're not sure if that's you or not, talk to the other folks that you're involved with on your side of the boundary segment. Talk with your counterparts on the other side of the boundary segment, and figure out who's going to help get the ball rolling and moving. Another role and responsibility is we hope that many segments will be able to be completed without any additional contact or feedback or support from ISP. If contact or feedback or support or people assistance or technical facilitation assistance is needed, someone on the local level needs to take the responsibility of letting us know and sending us an ask of what you need in terms of answers or help, so that we can help you out in completing your segment. The last role and responsibility on the local level that needs to be met by any of the parties involved is, once that segment is agreed on, is complete, has been modeled in the GIS, that GIS layer needs to be sent into ISP so that we can run our QA/QC process and add that to the master data and get that to the different places where we will get that data. In terms of roles and responsibilities on the VITA ISP side, we will publish and maintain the segment compilation guidelines and the source data that provide the model and the guidelines and the source data for this process. When we're aware of situations where we need to provide technical or facilitation assistance, we will provide that assistance. We will also coordinate through Joe on the GIS side and Dorothy Spears-Dean on the 911 side with their counterparts at the state level and neighboring states. So our neighboring states are aware of our process and our method. And so if you do share a PSAP line segment with North Carolina or Tennessee or Kentucky or West Virginia or Maryland or the District of Columbia, that when you contact your counterpart to set up a meeting and work through it, that they'll be aware from their own state of the process and what our approach is. VITA ISP will also take the role of receiving those submitted segments, maintaining the statewide data set to the published standards, and then we'll also make sure that that statewide layer is available to the next generation 911 core service providers, providing that service to the Commonwealth. So what VITA ISP has put forward is a technical model that outlines how to build and model these boundaries in GIS, and as well as a social model, a process model of how to achieve this goal. To get the resources, you can visit the Virginia GIS Clearinghouse at vgin.maps.arcgis.com. And when you visit that website, you'll see the splash screen on the left. If you click on the two blue arrows on the right side of that screen, it will advance and you'll see two additional icons. You'll want to click on the one on the right, the one that says Virginia NG 911 GIS Resources. When you go to that page, it will look like the page on the left, and you'll see that the first two items in that list deal with PSAP boundary concepts. The rest of the links on there currently are different resources dealing with our report card tools and our report card process. As for the PSAP boundary resources, the second link, the segment compilation guidelines, is the document that kind of outlines the roles and responsibilities. It has some screenshots and some step-by-steps of how you can use the tools, some of which we'll be demonstrating a little bit later in the webinar today, and also is the reference for how to submit data to us, and it's probably a good resource if you have detailed questions that for some reason we may not cover on the webinar today. The other link, the top one, the PSAP Boundary Development Tools, is the resource that is used in the GIS software, and it serves as the basis for the technical model. Because we are talking about GIS and software, there are a few technical requirements. The versions of the geodatabases and the MXD that we have in that download are set at version 10.0. So if you're running 10.0 and anything later, or ARC Pro or QGIS, you should be able to work with and interact with those geodatabase files in that version. You will need to use some GIS software. We've set up the model to use ArcGIS Desktop with the MXD, but you can use any software that's out there that has the ability to edit point and line features. As part of that, the data that we post is in zip files, so you'll need some method to zip and unzip files after you complete the segment. If it is in a geodatabase or if it is in a shapefile, it would be really helpful to zip that back up and email us the zip attachment rather than the shapefiles. And file geodatabases in particular have a hard time getting through some of our email filters. And then the last technical requirement, the ability to download resources from the internet and then send us those emails with the attached data. So as you download and extract the development tools, you will find in that zip folder 2 geodatabases and a MXD and ArcGIS Desktop document. And so I'm going to start from the bottom in terms of explaining what these building blocks are. The PSAP Boundary Development MXD contains and has included in it and symbolizes all of the other feature classes that are contained in the 2 geodatabases above it. It also contains several links to web services, and so if you want to quickly click on aerial photography, we do have the VGIN most recent aerial imagery feed in there and some other resources so that you could click on for quick reference. The Virginia PSAP Boundary Geodatabase contains 2 feature classes that have our best available PSAP Boundary Line and PSAP Boundary Junctions data inside of it. And these are included because these are the points of departure. Right now, everything in those feature classes is the best available data that we've built. None of the features in there have been approved as being mutually agreed upon by the sharing localities. But as we go through this process, as we review and update this data, we already have 1 segment submitted that we're working through that process now. The data will be updated there, and so as you work on these, especially if time elapses from when you work on it, or if the first of the month passes, you would want to go and obtain the newest version, the current version of this data. And so the Virginia PSAP boundary features are kind of our starting point. The jurisdiction edit PSAP data geodatabase and its feature classes are, the feature classes are there, but there are no points or lines or features in those feature classes. What the process entails is, as you identify the boundary line segment that you want to work on, the 2 junctions at either end of that segment, you'll copy those features from the VITA production PSAP data feature classes, paste them into the jurisdiction edit workspace, and then do the edits to the junctions or the line based on the discussion of the PSAP managers. That's where we're making the changes. That's where we're saving the changes. When those are done, zip up that jurisdiction edit geodatabase, email that to us, so you're just sending us those newer lines. And so that's kind of an overview of the data that we're providing and how it fits into the model. If you open up that MXD, this is kind of what you'll see in terms of how those different data elements are arranged and provided in the layers of the table of contents. You can also see some of those different services that we have pulled in there. The statewide address points, the statewide road center lines, the administrative boundaries, and the imagery. We'd encourage you, as you sit down to work on this process, to think about other data layers that may be useful to you, that you may have. Maybe structure footprints would make a lot of sense. Maybe parcels would for how you want to approach this. If your locality boundary is formed by a watershed boundary, mountain ridge, perhaps pulling in a hill-shaped model to help visualize that and a line off of that might be a really good idea. And in some cases, you may have better local data than what we have pulled together as a statewide service. The other advantage of using your local data is that if it's from a local resource on your local network, it's going to perform faster than if you're pulling the imagery for the entire Commonwealth in over the internet. So there are some speed advantages there, but of course you can use whatever data and resources you have available. You can also get an idea of the symbolization of what we'll be seeing with the data that's already provided, and then the colors that we'll be looking at for the data in the demonstration.
Something else that I had, and it pissed me off.
So let's go ahead and head over to the live version of this setup. And so I have that sample MXD opened up in in ArcMap. If we know that there's a particular segment that we want to work on, we can identify that, roll into it. I wouldn't recommend turning on the services until you're more zoomed in to see what the case may be. But I'm just going to double check here that I have, so we have Appomattox County on this side, and we have Buckingham County on this side, and they share this PSAP boundary between them. So using this as an example, if this was the segment that we wanted to work on, how we would use these tools is we would want to start editing on some of the features from our jurisdiction PSAP edits geodatabase. So I have my editor toolbar up there now. I'm going to go in and I'm going to select let me make sure I select what I want to select because this is always the fun part of doing a live demonstration. Don't want those, and I don't want that one, and I don't want that one. So I have selected there the two PSAP junctions on either end of that segment. And so I'm going to go ahead and copy, and then my paste button will pop up. Oh, I got ahead of myself. I'm going to have to do it one at a time. So let's start with the PSAP point selected. So I'm going to copy. If I go to paste, it will prompt me for what feature classes I can paste those features into. So I'm going to paste those into my PSAP junctions. And then if I unselect those, you'll see that those are now the orange dots of our PSAP junctions edit. Then I'm going to go back and select that one segment, the line segment, copy and paste. And it gives me two options here. I'm going to put this in the PSAP lines. We'll talk about the PSAP line comments a little bit later, and there are a few different ways to use that feature class as kind of a tool or a method that you can use. Copying it into there is one way of doing it, but there are some other ways to use that tool. So now we can see that I've copied over the two orange junctions, the red segment. I'm going to go ahead and save my edits. And so now that's my workspace. And those are the features in that jurisdiction edit geodatabase that we can work with. What we recommend doing is starting off with the junction points and zooming in on those, seeing if there's a reason why that may need to change. This one looks like it comes together. It's part of a water boundary. That may be the Appomattox River if my Virginia geography is correct, or something that contributes to it. But that looks like that's in the center there, and so from the purpose of Buckingham and Appomattox, that probably does not need to change. If we go back and we look at our other segment, it looks like this one is angled off a little bit here. We have another segment coming in here and another segment coming in there, and it's running through another larger body of water. That's something that would probably need to be adjusted, but it seems to be impacting more than just Appomattox and Buckingham. It seems clear that the shift of that would also impact Nelson County, and because that's in a water boundary, and the folks need to decide who's going to cover what part of the water, that will likely move, but perhaps that should be better saved for a conversation with the three parties. The other thing that you can do as part of that, if we're just focusing on the segment that we're dealing with, is if I am going to make this my only selectable layer for the purpose of moving that. If Rockingham and Appomattox are pretty sure where that's going to move and they want to use that as the line starting point, they can go ahead and move that for the purpose of their analysis. If they have an opportunity to loop Nelson representatives into the conversation, that's great. If not, when Beta ISP gets that segment, we're going to notice that junction will change, and we'll make sure to engage the other parties involved with it. So now that we've started, and we've started the process, identified the junction point, we're going to need to start working on our line segment. There are quite a few different methods of which, using GIS software, we can use to edit lines. And so it's kind of reliant on the tools and what you're familiar with. If you move your junction point, I'd recommend using the vertices and moving that starting point to at least get that snapped on the right place. Make sure that that's your good starting point. But then as you start from there and start looking at the line, the reshaped features may tend to work a little bit easier than some of the other tools, or going through and redrawing the line completely, or working with each individual vertice. So it looks like part of the boundary here between these two counties, and I should say that the source data that we're starting with comes from a few different sources and places. There are some parts of the Commonwealth where the regionally localities have already worked together to try to identify where some of their PSAP boundary segments are and how they should line up. And some of those have been provided to us, and if we've received those are reflected in this data set. They are not shown as approved in this data set. If the best course of action would be to review them with your neighbors, make sure that what's in here reflects what you agreed to. And if it is and that is accurate and you agree to them, let us know that is accurate, you agree to them, and we can flip the switch on that if there are no changes. If there are changes that need to be made, we recommend following this process and submitting the updated data this way. If it isn't from PSAP boundary data that we've previously received, we simply use the line work from the administrative boundaries data set that Virginia has put together, and that's the one that appears over here in the table of contents, if you need that for reference. So the line here, it seems to kind of follow. It looks like there's a little bit of a water feature here, but then it comes off and starts running through land for a bit of this. And so perhaps if we're reviewing this line segment, we may just want to start here and kind of reshape that, even that out based on the junction point that we changed. Where the junction point goes, where the PSAP boundary line segment goes, it's really dependent on where the two PSAP managers for each locality agree it should go. In the case of what we're doing in the GIS, we want to model the discussion, the decision-making, the agreement between the PSAPs and where they agree, and be able to make that work and model that on the GIS side. So as you start working down the line, what we're really doing is just doing a traverse, panning through the landscape, seeing if there are any particular places based on what we identify in the data or any other imagery to where there may be a reason to alter that line segment. And again, we're not altering any official legal boundary. We're just altering which PSAP is going to get that call. And so as we're moving through, we find a circumstance here to where there's the main road coming through here in Appomattox County. There's a driveway coming up here, and there's a farm or an outbuilding that's pretty close to this intersection. There are no further boundaries further up that road. And so it seems clear based on what we've looked at in the map and the imagery that if emergency services were responding to this structure, they're going to be coming down this road, turning up this way, rather than coming through the other area. If that's the case, it might make sense that the PSAP managers decide to, even if this is in Rockingham County, but, you know, I'm screwing up my geography, Buckingham County, there we go, perhaps a call made from here should be routed to the Appomattox PSAP, and the Appomattox staff answer that call and decide how to handle that. And so if they do decide that, it would be a matter of, okay, let's go in here and adjust the PSAP boundary segment to make sure that if a call is made from that location, from that structure, that's going to route over to the Appomattox PSAP. And so again, I've just kind of gone in using the reshape tool. There's already a line that we're working with, so reshape works rather well. There aren't any hard and fast cartography rules. Other than that, there are no gaps and no overlaps. But what we want to do is model where that agreement is with that. And so if that's where agreement that the Appomattox PSAP will take that call, then we can go in, we can save the edits, and we can continue working down the line looking for the next issues of where they may pop up. One of the supplementary data sets that may be helpful is if you do have call data in spatial format, especially if it's mutual aid responses, or seeing where emergency staff from one locality has responded quite a bit or more than the emergency response staff in the other locality. That sort of data and visual analysis that may help visualize local situations that emergency operations staff or PSAP managers may already know is happening. And so you may want to use data, you may want to use local knowledge of circumstances and odd places, or where there's already a lot of cooperation around the border. And as you go through and work through the process, generally those tend to even out. Okay, we're going to carve this side and send it to locality A. This other side we're going to carve over and send to locality B. And really just based on agreement of how do we provide the best service to the folks living in those areas, and how do we help the PSAPs do their jobs. So the process, it's going to vary incredibly for the 392 segments because each segment's different. It's going over different land area. There's different data that helps us model and reflect what's there. Some are cutting across land as geometric features. Some are ridges. Some may be roads or highways. Some may be water features, lakes, bays, rivers, reservoirs. And so all of the circumstances will change and vary. Our recommendation for the process is think about what data you may need to help make a good decision, set up a meeting, have GIS staff that feel comfortable driving the map, have PSAP staff that are comfortable making the decision to be able to go through and traverse through and resolve any issues as they come up during one meeting. We find that in rural areas, there may not be as much need for change. In urban areas where there's a lot more of the built environment and roads and subdivisions, even in the urban fringe where the only access to a new subdivision in County A may be by driving through roads in County B. There may be more to change and more places for the segment to be altered, more need for discussion. But in terms of the technical model, It's the process of seeing what's there and what's going through it. A question we sometimes get is what scale should we be working with? It's going to vary. I'm at about 1 to 5,000, kind of panning through this more rural area. At this scale, I'm going to be able to see streams and roads and houses and outbuildings. If you're working in a suburban environment where you may want to look and make sure that all of a parcel is in one or the other, or that a PSAP boundary is not bisecting a strip mall or an apartment building, you may need to zoom in a bit more to clearly see that and helpfully model that accurately. But we'd encourage the GIS staff to use your professional judgment of what's appropriate and what's accurate to do that. So here may be a case of where it's cutting across straight there. That's starting to follow a different feature there. But if there's concern that we want to make sure that a call from this area goes to this PSAP and not this one, maybe that's a case where we may want to go in and reshape that line a little bit as well. So in terms of tools and methods, available data that you may think may help you, the editing tools and techniques that you're comfortable with to move those point features and reshape the line feature. One of the resources that we've built in is the line comments, and these show up in purple. There are a couple different ways that you can use this as a resource as you're working with this data. One is if you're working with a complex segment or a complex area, and maybe you want to do some internal pre-planning and make notes or call out areas before you get together with the other locality to work through this. You could use the comments feature class to kind of call out those areas. If you may need to have a follow-up meeting, you can use the elements here to kind of record what the thinking is or action items for who's going to follow up. In the case here, where if there is agreement to what's being done, maybe we made this segment here, and we know that the folks that made that decision, the folks that are in the room, may not always be around, may not always still be in that role of responsibility. If a question comes up in the future of, well, why do we draw the PSAP boundary line that way? Shouldn't it be the other way? And so the line comments is a feature that we can use to help us with that in terms of putting a note in the map of what we want that to be. This is set up as a line feature, and so there are a few things that we could do with this. We could just digitize over that change if we wanted to. If it was just something that you wanted to do as a small area, you could do a small line. That kind of functions as the point. You could also, of course, draw a line in something that looks like a circle, kind of a lassoing. The features or elements that are out there. But we've included that as a way to identify, record spatially what the issue was, what decisions were made, or if there was something that may not be readily apparent as to why that boundary is shifted. And so the PSAP, there's a drop down there for the for the PSAPs that are involved. And then there's the comment field for what you can put in there, type in there with that. And note date, time, what you agreed to, why you did what you did. If you submit that to us, we won't publish those out with the data that we provide, but we will maintain the history of that internally. And so hopefully there'll be a local copy. There'll also be a collected copy. So if we get questions in the future, do you know why this was done this way for this reason? We will be able to help assist with that. We'd ask that you not submit kind of working comments. Hey, we need to go back and look at this, or locality A needs to ask locality so-and-so and locality B about this because they know something about this area that we know they know that, but they couldn't come to the meeting to help figure things out. Those things we'd ask that you not send in to us, but if there are comments that do kind of reflect the decisions that are made or why the line is why it is, those would be useful for us to help document that process. So that, in a nutshell, is the tools and the way that we envision them working for a segment, and kind of walking through that method of identifying the segment, copying the junctions and the segment over to the edit, and kind of that process of review, traverse, discuss, update the data as you work through the process. This would be repeated for each different line segment that you do. There are a couple different ways of managing that file management-wise, segment-wise. If you wanted to download that same zip file or extract that and maybe just rename that folder when you unzip it for each new segment that you have, you could certainly do that. If it's keeping a empty version of the jurisdiction edit geodatabase and copying and renaming that to each segment that you work on, that may be another strategy for that. It's something that you could probably work out with your neighboring PSAP. Decide who is you're working on this segment, who is going to do the edits for that, track that, because you don't need both GIS shops doing it. You just need one to do that and send that in. If you are working in an area where you don't have GIS staff or they're not available to help you out with this process, let us know. Contact your regional coordinator, whoever that may be, and we can kind of have the conversation with you of what options are to help you achieve what we need for this project. So some of the things that we talked about with the technical model that I talked through as we were demonstrating, the recommended method of your starting at endpoints, then the traverse. For the tools, use the techniques you're comfortable with. Use the comments feature class to document decisions or help plan work. For resources, in addition to what's available by the download, think about other data that you have, other operational knowledge that you or other folks in your locality may have, or via ISP, if that's your regional coordinator or folks in the ISP office.
So, Matt, we've got a couple of questions that have come in on the chat box, and I think they fit with the material here. First question is, should the deviations that you demonstrated, should we draw around an entire property or just the structure on the property?
I think the answer to that varies. If it's a very large property in a more rural area, you may want to have the go more based on the structure than all 180 acres, is the case may be. If there are different buildings on different parts of that property and there's different access to them, that would be another consideration. If you're looking at urban or suburban lots, you may want to go more based on tracing the parcel boundaries for that circumstance, knowing that parcel boundaries can shift and they update, and that it doesn't have to exactly match and fit those. That may be something to consider in your workflow process of if you are updating parcel boundaries between jurisdictions. You also need to check the PSAP boundary. So it depends. Make your best decision based on the context that you observe. And if you'd like VEDA ISP staff to weigh in on particular examples or case studies, send us a screenshot, get us on the phone. We'd be happy to weigh in on that.
Okay, the next question is, if someone is located just past the line of a PSAP boundary segment but can only be reached by another PSAP, how will that affect the dispatching of that run order? Okay, so I'll go ahead and handle this one. To remind folks that the PSAP boundary segment that we're drawing here is singularly determining which PSAP that the call gets directed to. So in today's world, we have the concept of transfers because of cell phone towers in other locations. In the context of this question, in terms about dispatching and run order, once that call gets connected to the PSAP, the boundary set that we're talking about here becomes secondary. So about the dispatching and the run order, that's still going to be dependent on how your CAD is set up, whether or not you can have a unit dispatched or whether it's more appropriate to transfer the call. That becomes secondary to the data set that we're describing here. It may be that as we develop these and we get through the next-gen 911 deployment process, there may be value for the telecommunicator or dispatcher having this data set display inside the CAD for context and referencing where the call is coming from. But again, in terms of dispatch and run order, that's still going to operate as it does today based on however that's handled in your CAD.
Trying to summarize that, the goal of the PSAP boundary is to determine which PSAP is going to take that call when it goes into the next-gen environment. Once a PSAP takes that call, it depends on everything that they do today in terms of how their CAD is set up, if they want to transfer, if there are mutual aid agreements that may exist. The PSAP boundary doesn't change any of that. It just determines who gets the call and trying to provide the best service possible for that.
So a follow-up to that answer is that will these calls be based on location of the call or where the actual call is made or the alley MSAG or where the closest address is to that phone call? So in today's environment, obviously the landline call is directly tied to the alley, and the alley won't be going away. So that will continue to be a lat long that's tied to the known address and that address point represented in that alley record. In the context of the MSAG or the GeoMSAG, that's still going to be based on carrier by carrier as their adoption of future technologies improve. this will hopefully be able to take advantage of increased accuracy compared to phase 1 coordinates or even phase 2 coordinates. Those issues don't get taken away, so to speak, by the context that we can draw a very precise PSAP boundary. The two processes are very much parallel. So we're creating a very a refined PSAP boundary that has both high accuracy and high precision, but we're still operating in the context of the coordinates that are available today. So that's going to be very much tied to the local geography, the issues of physics for where the cell towers are located, how they connect, whether that particular manufacturer is using triangulation versus handset-based technologies. That will hopefully continue to evolve and get more accurate over time, but it's still going to be driven by the technology that is used to generate that coordinate on the originating service provider side.
Okay, so when we have the GIS data for that line segment modeling what's been agreed to by the localities, to submit that data, someone needs to zip up that jurisdictions edit geodatabase, email that as an attachment to ng911gis@vita.virginia.gov. When you do that, include as the CC all the staff from both jurisdictions, both localities that was involved in the agreement. If that's 4, that's great. If that's 12, that's great. Or maybe you just want to involve the key decision makers. But make sure everybody's in the loop on that, and therefore also each side has a copy of that. When you send in that email, please let us know if the junction features did or did not move. It's fine if they do, and we have a process by which we'll review that and make sure the other folks affected by that are in the loop. If you forget that part, we'll check it anyway, but it helps us with our workflow planning. The other part of this is confirm the agreed upon segment effective date. If you're not in Next Generation 911 deployed yet, I would just use the date of your agreement. Down the road, when all of the Commonwealth is Next Gen 911 I3 compliant, what the segment effective date would allow us to do would be, we know this is going to change in the future when this development comes on. So the idea would be do the line segment, know that that's going to change by mutual agreement July 1st, 2023, and send that in ahead of time so everybody that needs and drives off of that data, including the next generation core service providers, will have that data before they need it to be effective to help with the updates of the system. So if you're don't have a deployment date yet, don't worry about it. Just put in today's date. But the effective date will be more important moving forward in the future as we start deploying. When that data is submitted, VITA ISP staff will review that data for QA/QC, and then we'll update the data and push that out. So through our presentation and demonstration, we've been talking through providing examples of what we think of as a social process model to achieve this. This really is a self-service concept. It really is a decision between bordering PSAP staff for each of the 392 segments. The way that we can best make this work is have the representative localities meet, agree on the changes, record those changes, and submit that. There may be some variations to this that you want to employ based on your neighbors and your relationship with them, the nature of the boundaries, a number of other different factors, but we'd encourage you to kind of start with this self-service concept as a process. Make that phone call, send that email. Hey, let's get together and work this out. Everybody needs to do it. If there is a line segment, it's not just yours, it's also your neighbors. And you need to get together to work that out. If you have technical questions, process questions, people questions, facilitation questions, reach out to us at ng911gis@vita.virginia.gov. Reach out to a regional coordinator. Let us know what your concerns are. Let us know what you're asking for. Let us know what you want to talk about, and we can help provide resources, meet our responsibility of providing additional resources, be that people or organization or facilitation, to help you complete your segments. So some questions that we frequently get asked as we're looking at PSAP boundaries. I have a lot of neighbors. Do I have to have my entire boundary and all of my segments done before I submit my data? We don't recommend that, and the answer is no. We recommend working segment by segment, sending in each segment as it's completed. One of the reasons for that answer comes from these questions. Well, when do I have to have my first segment done? You have to have your first segment done more than 90 days before your first neighbor's deployment date. Your neighbor will need that segment done sooner than you will if they have a deployment date earlier than yours. And so please be neighborly and please be respectful of your neighbor's time demands. If theirs is coming up, it's a higher priority for them than it is for you. But you're probably going to have folks on your other side where it's going to be a higher priority for you than it is for them. When do you have to have all of your segments complete? More than 90 days before your deployment date. That's one of the core data layers that you'll be working with. It drives a lot of the QA/QC and GIS data validation with the core service providers that has at least based on the Fairfax contract with AT&T, all of that has to be sorted out and agreed to 90 days before the deployment date. My border is a mountain, a swamp, a lake, a stream, a river, a bay, an ocean, shared with another state, some other variable. What do I do differently than if it was just a line through land? Nothing different's needed. That same process works. Get together with your neighbors, copy the junction points, copy the line segment, do that traverse, see where you need to adjust it. The things that you're looking for in the imagery or from contextual data may be different. You may want to follow the center course through a large river, but if locality on the south side has a long fishing pier jutting out that crosses the border, and it's only a pier, not a bridge, you may want to adjust that. And so it's going to be that same process with what you're working through.
Something else was, yeah.
I've been working on PSAP boundaries as part of a regional group. Do I have to submit each segment individually? We know that there are some regions that have been working on this. If you already have a good data set, or if you've been working on these with your neighbors and really haven't put it into the model that we've provided, but you mutually agree on them, don't feel like you have to copy that data over into the schema we've provided and send that in. if you've agreed to it, send in what you have, and we'll ingest that into our process. So if you've done a lot of work on this already, we don't want you to redo that work. So just send us what you have. If you haven't started yet, we'd recommend using the data and the tools and the process we've outlined for you. I run QGIS 3.6 on my Mac. Will this work with the data that Beta ISP provides? The data will work just fine. Q 3.6 will support the version 10 file geodatabase. You can copy and edit and save in those features. The MXD won't work, so if you are doing it in Q or something else, you probably have to make your own project and add in those other data layers as you work on it. But it is not a technical obstacle to using the data that's provided. I'm kind of fuzzy on some of these particular scenarios of when my PSAP boundary maybe should shift and pick up areas of other localities. There are a lot of different examples of how and why it can move and shift. We kind of talked around a few of those today, but the recorded webinar from January that Joe led on PSAP boundary creation and maintenance has a lot more detailed examples and kind of models that discussion process, and has illustrations of scenarios of where and why you may want to change those things. And so that is a helpful resource if you want a more background refresher on some of those concepts. There's a new subdivision development in the next county over, but the only way to get there is through my county. We're reviewing the PSAP boundary and know that we will need to update it. How do we do this? We recommend planning ahead. As soon as you know that you have that potential issue, get together, look at the plans, figure out where that PSAP boundary segment may change, update that segment following the process, and email that in, noting the effective date in the submittal email. I'm still not entirely sure what to do next with this PSAP boundary process. I'm not sure I can get all this done for my locality by the deadline. Kind of rusty on editing in GIS. My neighbor, he's a great guy. She's a great gal. We just don't get along in locality. And finally, so what really is required? Talked about all this stuff. What do I really need to do to successfully complete a segment? You need engagement of both localities around that boundary. You need engagement of all the localities that share a junction point if it changes. You need awareness of your own and your neighboring PSAP timelines for deployment. You need availability and participation and engagement of PSAP managers, both localities. You need availability and participation of locality GIS staff. If you need them to help, you know, that's where needed. If you need VGIN support through regional coordinators or other staff, we see ourselves and the staff that we have in an ISP as, if you need us to help you complete the process, we are required to help you complete that process, and we'll do what we can to make that successful. And then we also need consistent quality assurance and quality control. All of these things together will help us complete a segment successfully. All 392 segments completed successfully together helps the Commonwealth achieve its goal of having a unified, consistent, mutually agreed upon PSAP polygon set that we can provide to the next-gen core service providers that will actually help us implement and make next-generation 911 work for all of us in the Commonwealth. So some contacts, if you want to reach out for follow-ups. The next ng911gis@vita.virginia.gov. Email, if you're not sure who to contact or who can answer a question, please send it there, and we'll make sure that someone that can speak to your questions or concerns can follow up with you. Your VITA ISP regional coordinators, myself or Joe, are also available more on the GIS side or the process side. But if you ask us a question and we can't answer it, we'll find the person who can and get you the answer. Are there any other questions that we can answer for you based on the materials or content of the webinar, or squirrels that you may be chasing as part of thinking through this process?
Okay. For folks that have made time in their day to attend today's webinar, I want to thank you again for making this a priority. Thank you to Matt for putting together today's materials and presentation. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be available, posted to the ISP website sometime later this week. And as the slide indicates, the next webinar related to Next-Gen 911 will be Wednesday, June 12th at 2 p.m., where we'll be demonstrating the NG 911 deployment dashboard and other informational resources to support outreach in deploying next-generation 911 in the Commonwealth. Thank you very much again, and have a good day.